Hello historians, it is January 7th, 2021. Today we're going to talk about the War of 1812. In the email that this video is attached to, there's some other videos also about Lewis and Clark and the Lewis and Clark expedition that I want you to watch. Also attached to that is your homework for this coming week, due next Thursday. So pay attention, you've got some more reading and a little writing assignment, just a paragraph or two, not a big essay or anything, so make sure you check that out. All right, so we're going to talk about the War of 1812. Guess what? It happened in the year 1812 till about 1814. Okay, so the United States basically takes on the world's greatest naval power, which is Great Britain. Great Britain has like 100 naval ships, and the United States has like 14, right there in the low teens. So this is quite an endeavor, but we do have a little bit of an advantage in that at the same time, Great Britain is fighting Napoleon in the Napoleonic Wars, or Napoleon is fighting the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, and Great Britain is taking on Napoleon at the same time. So Britain is kind of divided. In addition to fighting the British during this period of time, we are also pushing westward into Native American lands and territory, and we are also fighting, in some cases, Native Americans for that territory, which in the idea of manifest destiny that the United States should extend from the Atlantic to the Pacific, part of our goal is to push through. And, you know, we also have, like I said, you're going to watch these videos about Lewis and Clark, all in kind of the same era, so a lot is going on. James Madison is now president, our father of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the architect of the Bill of Rights. He is now the president. His wife, Dolly Madison, is now the first lady, and they are living in Washington, living in this brand new White House that has been built, the presidential mansion, which by British standards is just kind of a nice palatial house. It's nothing like Buckingham Palace, you know, or the French palace at Versailles, which were just, you know, giant and massive and intricate and amazing. And our house is fairly modest. Our presidential house is fairly modest compared to those of the royalty in Great Britain and in France. And also, Washington, D.C. is a brand new city. If you remember, a deal was made for the Hamilton song, The Room Where It Happened. Only the men who were there know how this deal was actually made, but it was agreed that the nation's capital would be on the line between Maryland and Virginia. It would be in the southern part of what will eventually be the full United States, and so that was part of the deal. So we have a brand new city, the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., and it isn't finished. It's still a construction zone. A lot of it's still just muddy, and there aren't like good roads yet, and nothing is really finished. You know, there are still, you know, there's brick workers and stone workers everywhere, and they're, you know, putting all of this new beautiful city together. And so what are those? So we're talking about the War of 1812, right? Some of the causes of the War of 1812, okay? One of them was something called impressment, which looks like this. Okay, impressment was basically when a British ship would capture an American ship and would take sailors off of the American ship and put them onto duty on the British ships. And the Americans were not happy with this. It's kind of a funny thing because you remember we haven't really been separate countries for very long, so a lot of those sailors who were American sailors or had actually been British. I mean, they were British sailors before they were American sailors, so it's kind of funny. But that was one of the reasons. Another was Canada. The United States wanted Canada, or at least a part of Canada, and so we were in pursuit of new land. Same reason that we were pushing west into the Native American lands, we also want some of Canada from the British. So we begin that kind of process. We have the Louisiana Purchase, which we have that land now, even though it wasn't really belonged to the French, it really belonged to the Native Americans, but the French sold it to Thomas Jefferson in the United States. And about 400,000 Americans are now living on these new lands. They are having some conflict with Native American people. That's all part of it. There was actually a lot of tribes were, you know, we just want to go along to get along. We just want to live side by side. We'll leave you alone, you leave us alone. We don't want to have conflict. But there was one Native American leader. His name was Tecumseh. I hope you can see that all right. Tecumseh. And he was a promoter of active resistance against American incursion onto their tribal lands. And so he is part of a lot of this conflict. And in 1811, the territorial governor of Indiana, the Indiana Territory, his name is William Henry Harrison, and he leads U.S. troops into a battle called the Battle of Tippecanoe. It was a defeat that convinced many Indians that they needed the British to help them stop the Americans. And so they began to work with the British. William Henry Harrison would actually eventually go on to campaign for the presidency under a slogan talking about the Battle of Tippecanoe, as he was a hero of that. And so we are having, in Washington, there's more and more pressure from those who were in favor of war against the Indians and war against the British. Sometimes we call people who are in favor or pushing for war hawks as opposed to doves, right? So these war hawks were pressuring Congress and Madison, right? And in 1812, in June of 1812, the president signed a declaration of war against Britain. Congress ultimately voted for the war. Both House and Senate were really divided. There was really disagreement. Most of the Western and the Southern congressmen supported the war, while the New Englanders and the Federalists, they were opposed to it because they depended heavily on trade with the British. So they didn't want to go to war with the British again. And they actually accused the Hawks of talking about our maritime rights and what are we allowed to do at sea, using that as an excuse to be expansionist. And so that was quite a debate. So in order to strike against Great Britain, the U.S. forces attacked Canada, and because it was a British colony, right? And American officials were pretty sure that they would succeed in this invasion of Canada, but the British, the Canadian British, they put up a great defense under a guy named Sir Isaac Brock, and it was a humiliating defeat for the Americans, and partly because Brock joined up with Tecumseh. They worked together, and they basically chased the Americans out of Canada, and it was kind of humiliating. And they actually also gave up the city of Detroit in what is now Michigan, which is American City now, in the process, and it was pretty humiliating. Things were looking a little better in the West. Commodore Perry, his name was Oliver Hazard Perry, he has a great success at the Battle of Lake Erie in 1813, which puts the Northwest Territory in American hands, firmly in American hands. And Harrison was able to retake Detroit with a victory in the Battle of Thames, okay, spelled like the French River, Thames, Thames. It looks like Thames, it's Thames, okay? It's French. And the great river in London is also called the Thames. Okay, oh, I lost my place in my notes. Give me a second. Oh, and at the Battle of Thames, Tecumseh is killed. So this great hero, this great Native American hero is killed in that battle. And meanwhile, the U.S. Navy out in the ocean had been able to score several victories over the Royal Navy in the early months of the war, in part because a lot of the Navy is over in towards Europe fighting the Napoleonic Wars, helping with that fight. And Napoleon is defeated in April 1814. And now the British are able to turn their full attention on to North America. And a large number of British troops are sent over in ships, and they raid the Chesapeake Bay, first of all, just north of here. That's where they go first. And then they head towards Washington, D.C., and they move into the capital and they capture Washington, D.C., and on August 24th, 1814, they burned the White House and the Capitol and a number of other government buildings. So yesterday when the Capitol was attacked was only the second time that's ever happened, and the other time it was the British. The British burned our Capitol. Mostly they burned the dome of the Capitol, which is made of wood, and not the rest of the Capitol, because the dome was actually under construction. I think that's the right dates, but I'll double check. I'll tell you next time in case I get it wrong. But the building is mostly stone at this point, and the worst part was the roof was not. I don't think it had the dome yet. I think it was a regular roof, and the roof burned down and fell in. And so it's also the great story of Dolly Madison saving the full-length portrait of George Washington. They couldn't get the frame off the wall. It was nailed to the wall, so they had to take it out, cut it out of its frame, and roll it up and spirit it away to save it. And it's still in the White House, in the East Room of the White House to this very day. And the other thing that I mentioned in the last lecture was this guy named Francis Scott Key, who wrote a poem. Actually, he set the tune to that of an old English drinking song, but it would eventually become our national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light, right? He's on a ship in Baltimore Harbor, and he sees that the American flag is still flying. And that's where that song comes from. It actually is a very long song, has 5 stanzas. We just sing the first stanza as our national anthem. If you don't know the national anthem by heart, you should learn it. Just like the Pledge of Allegiance, you should know the national anthem by heart. So I recommend that to you. I'm not going to make it an assignment because I'm not going to make you sing it to me. But it's good to know it. Hopefully when you go to a baseball game, a football game, or some other sporting event, and they play the national anthem, you can put your hand over your heart and you can sing it along with it. That's a good thing as American to be able to do. And so British forces leave the Chesapeake Bay, and they actually start heading for New Orleans, and that will be in our next lecture. So the end of the War of 1812, peace talks begin in the city of Ghent, not in Norfolk, but Ghent in Belgium, in the modern country of Belgium. And so we begin, Britain wants peace. They want an armistice, the end to battle, after they are unable to take Baltimore. And so they negotiated, and the United States gives up some of its demands, and the British said that, we're keeping Canada's borders the same. We're not giving you that, but we're not going to try to create an Indian or a Native American state in the northwest part of the country. We're going to back off from that. So they worked it all out, and they signed the Treaty of Ghent on December 24th, 1814. It will be ratified in February, the next year in February. What is a little interesting fact, sometimes happens back in wars when there wasn't a lot of communication, is that on January 1815, the British, not knowing that peace had been concluded at this point, that the armistice was signed, the treaty was signed, that was all done, they went into battle by attacking New Orleans. They met defeat at the hands of Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson becomes the hero of the Battle of New Orleans. And eventually he will become president. News of the victory raised morale in the country. And it left Americans with a taste of victory, even though we did not really get anything from Canada. Other than, you know, the death of Tecumseh, we haven't made much progress with the Native Americans and the Native American lands. So a lot of you may have never heard of the War of 1812. It was fairly minor between the United States and Great Britain. But for Canadians and Native Americans, it was a big deal. And it was a decisive turning point, actually, for the Native Americans. It kind of meant the beginning of the end of their ability to govern themselves, that they are going to come under the jurisdiction of the United States and have decisions made for them in many ways, and eventually their lands will be taken from them and they will be relocated to other lands that generally are not even similar to the lands that they lived on. Plains Indians were sent off the plains into other areas. The Indians in the southern part of what is now the United States are moved in a terrible incident called the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma. So imagine living on the East Coast in the South, in the forest and the humidity and the heat and having the ocean there, and you're forced to walk to Oklahoma, which is dry and dusty and flat and completely different than anything you've ever known. So yeah, it was very traumatic for many Native people during that time. But the war's outcome boosted national self-confidence, and it increased America's thirst for expansionism. Okay, that's going to shape the better part of the 19th century, is America pushing out into the lands to the west, and more conflict with Native American people, more battles. That will really continue until we reach the Civil War, when all attention is then focused on that. All right, so remember to do your homework. Remember to watch the other videos on the email, and maybe I'll see you in person next week. I don't know, but either way, you'll see me, and we'll learn some more about history. All right, y'all. Bye for now.